who are at home. As I was saying, sorry to those of you at home, we were having technical difficulty. We did not continue the meeting when you guys lost audio and video, so we will go back to the question, and I can't even recall what the question was.
Yeah, so I'll just highlight one point, Madam Chair, if I may. This particular item, there was a question from Supervisor Kazmicki concerning transparency for the public. We had an opportunity and some time to talk with the auditor and caucus over this. What we were thinking of is we could make this available to the public through OpenGov system, like we have with the CSAs, and have this de minimis piece of it there available for whoever needs to look at it and wants to review it. So I think that's something that Gabriel will work on and bring back to your board during the budget process and other things. There's a lot that we're going to try to make as much transparency, as much of our budget and as much of our expending transparent to the public. That's the whole goal of OpenGov. So anyways, I just wanted to share that. I don't know if you had anything to add, Joe Paul.
No, I think that's the whole purpose of bringing this item forward is, one, government consistency. We want to be consistent with our procurement policy, purchasing policy, with our budget policy. That also that the transparency, everything we do, every single transaction can be viewed in OpenGov. So it's honestly, this is really the county government is the people's government, and so they get to see every single item, no matter what, as it relates to financial transactions.
So you wanted us to approve the form then? Is that?
Yes, basically the form is consistent with the County Budget Act. It still takes 4/5 vote by the Board of Supervisors to increase revenues and appropriations, to bring in like new money to be spent. The board still has to do that by a 4/5 vote.
Right. But this,
And that cannot be done by either the CAO or myself. It can only be done by the board.
but the lengthy verbiage on the agenda is spelling out the situations where that would occur, where this form would be utilized, correct?
Well, this form is utilized for any sort of change, any change whatsoever
budget.
to the budget after the budget hearings. So anytime there's a department that, brings in new money, a grant or whatever, they would be, and they want to spend it in the current fiscal year, they would fill out one of these forms, and they would bring it into the board for consideration.
Right, and then that's where we would need the 4/5 vote.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So then, have we gone to the public, I'm sorry, on this form? Okay, can we do that?
If you'd like to make a comment in chambers, please provide a speaker card. On Zoom, you can press *9 on your phone or the raise your hand icon on your screen. No comments.
Okay, so what is the will of the board regarding the form that we would, looking for a motion to approve the form, the budget transfer form?
I'll move to approve the proposed budget adjustment transfer policy.
Okay,
I'll move to second.
okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Got a 5-0 on your new form.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 9.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're making some headway now. We have Gabriel Orozco. He's our budget officer. He's going to be presenting this particular item. And this is also requested from your board to provide a presentation with regards to our reserve policy. So, Gabriel?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Board of Supervisors, members of the public. CEO Espinosa, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Gabriel Orozco, the budget officer for the county. As it has been requested a couple of times through various meetings, we wanted to take a deeper dive at our current general fund reserve policy and a little bit of comparison to other possibilities that we could set in place and potentially look at what we can set up and what are some limitations that can be brought up. So just really fast, what are reserves? Reserves are essentially funding that we can set aside to cover on I guess the unexpected side whenever we have a downturn in the market or an unanticipated expense for whatever reason that, something comes up. We could have, a natural disaster that washes out a road in South County. And what this will do is provide a little bit of flexibility for the county to be able to move quickly on that unanticipated disaster expense in order for us to continue to provide services without a lapse in coverage. So, like I mentioned, the majority of these reserves are on the term of continuing operations and on covering for unanticipated emergencies. And these reserves are primarily funded through general funding that the county has. So essentially what we would be doing is if there's any unassigned balance within the general fund that we haven't yet committed or assigned to any other purpose, we'd be able to put it into one of these reserves if we so choose to. So currently, the Board of Supervisors has never adopted a formal policy. We are currently we are within GASB regulations, so all of our accounting has been, it's correct as regulations go, but we've never had anything formal set up. The way that we've been doing it, as I presented a couple weeks back, looking at our assigned balance, our committed funds, our unassigned balance, the way that that's been set up is accordance with the Budget Act and GASB requirements. So everything we've been doing up to now has been correct. The only thing is that we've never really had a per se a formal policy which guides us, and we look to every year to tell us, okay, this is the amount that we're going to be putting in reserve to cover our operations, or this is the amount that we're going to be putting to cover emergencies. The only piece that we do have in place is a disaster recovery fund. That's adopted through the budget process. Typically, over the last couple years, it's been anywhere between $1 million to $500,000. This funding has been set in place to cover any unanticipated emergencies. So, for example, this prior year, there was $1 million that was set into this disaster recovery, and what we used some of that funding for was to put it forward to use for various roads that had pothole issues throughout the county. What we did was we took essentially that $1 million and were able to award 2 $500,000 contracts, one to Granite Rock, the other one to Chapin, in order to make sure that we were able to fix our roads that were in dire straits because of, essentially what we had, just flood damage and everything that was destroying our roads. So having these funds in place definitely does provide a sense of security within the county, within the fund, in order to fund some of these projects that otherwise we wouldn't have any funding to cover. So a little bit of information on that I've been kind of gathering on what would be appropriate reserve. Government Financial Officers Association is a collective group founded in 1906. It's essentially financial officials from all over the United States, whether if it's state, city, county jurisdictions. It has a lot of collaboration, and it's kind of seen as a go-to source of information for anything related to regulation or any information that can be attained, and what would be, I guess, considered as part of a gold standard on what we want the budget to adhere to and have. So GFOA is something that we look for whenever we're looking at some guidance as to what we should move towards. And like I mentioned, so it's essentially their mission is to advance excellence in public finance, which is essentially what we would hope to achieve. In a couple of years, I know right now we don't have a GFOA certificate of approval for our budget yet, but in a couple of years, I would hope to get our budget up to meeting every standard within GFOA, which would be an amazing goal for the county for us to achieve. As it stands on the matter of reserve policy, GFOA recommends at a minimum a 2-month regular fund operating revenue to cover operating expenses. In dollar figures, what this means to the general fund, and I'm looking, and my dollar figure is derived from looking at our operations from the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget. That would mean putting essentially $9 million into a reserve to cover those 2 months of operating. The 2 months of operating would be anything from salaries all the way to services, fixed expenses, anything in between for essentially 2 months of operating. That is the terms that GFOA recommends. Various counties and some jurisdictions or local neighbors also follow GFOA and some of their guidance. For example, the city of Santa Cruz follows it pretty much exactly to the dot. Their reserve policy states 2 months operating. A couple of other jurisdictions have some form of accounting for a couple of operating months of expenses. But the one that I saw that just kind of stood out was essentially the city of Santa Cruz, which specifically spelled out 2 months. So there are exactly a correlation between what GFOA recommends and what the county, what the city of Santa Cruz is moving on. A couple of other options, as I mentioned, that was seen in various jurisdictions, cities and counties, is the use of a percentage-based reserve that gets set up, and the various ranges that I saw were anywhere between 5 to 25%. And within that, they made breaks between having an operational reserve and an emergency reserve, but all within the 5 to 25% range. What I have here on the left is a couple of percentage terms based off of our operating expenses. So for example, a 5% operating expenses for our 21-22 fiscal year budget is close to about 3.5 million. 10% reserve is close to about 7 million, 6.9. 15% reserve is about 10.5 million. A 20% reserve is close to 14 million, 13.9. A 25% reserve is 17 million. So these are all very big dollars. And it'd be money that we would be putting away in order to provide some form of security, whether in the form of security in case we have a downturn in the market, we have a drop in property taxes, our sales taxes isn't coming in as it should, or due to some unforeseen natural disaster, we at some point just have unanticipated expenses that are burdened on the county, and what this would provide is some form of flexibility. So this is more or less a range in opinions from percentages based off our current expenses, so you have an idea on what they would look like. For reference, as I mentioned, ideally what we would be putting is some unassigned funding towards filling up the reserve policy. Currently, based off of our adopted budget, and as it goes through a couple of its different reiterations, finishing up, tying in and finalizing the funds, on the first version of the adopted budget, we had somewhere along the lines of about $13 million that would have been unassigned. Within that amount of funding, there was $6 million of which was ARPA funding. It's right now sitting unassigned because we have, as of yet, to move forward with different projects to fund out of that $6 million. There's only been a couple, about $1 million, which we have moved forward with specific projects, whether it was the vaccine incentive or the nonprofit grants. So those have been the only amount of dollars that have been expensed out of that unassigned, but the remainder amount, the $5 million is still more or less in play for different expenses that we want to move towards. But The bigger picture is we had 13 million, 6 million of which was ARPA. The remaining amount, the 7 million, is what we would have in play if we wanted to put towards one of the reserve based off the percentages. You could see that if we put the whole 7 million into reserves, we'd have somewhere around the 10% reserve if we wanted to set up. One key area that I did want to mention is that if we were to move everything into reserves, that would in a way limit our flexibility within the budget currently, because we wouldn't have in a way any wiggle room besides needing and having a need to come back to the board to ask for movement of funds out of the reserve to fund unanticipated expenses for one reason or another. So from looking at it from a budgetary kind of flexibility standpoint, making the change right now wouldn't be, I think, in the best interest for the county to move forward with that. And I think it's something that we would want to look at as a more gradual approach. And that's something that I cover. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. What the county administration office and what myself am kind of bringing forward on what I would like to set up is a tiered system approach. What I would set up is a tier 1 and a tier 2 system. Essentially, I would have a tier 1 safety reserve, which would be more or less to cover our operational expenses, and then a tier 2 reserve to cover emergency, which would be our emergency reserve to cover in case of any unforeseen emergency that happens. What this would be a support to our disaster recovery fund that we already kind of have set up within the budget process. To me, this would be the best approach. Ideally, we would pick a percentage allocation for a tier 1 and a tier 2. So just to throw out some numbers, if we say we want to have a 20% reserve, that's great. What amount would be ideal for a tier 1 and tier 2? I would say, let's say if we put a 15% on an operational reserve and a 5% for an emergency reserve. So have it as a tiered approach where you're able to have a percentage set up on one side for dealing with your operational expenses, and then a tier 2 on the other side to set up for any emergency situations which may or may not come up. But at least you have a reserve set up that you're able to deal with those situations when they do come up. A couple of suggestions. As I mentioned, I was getting a little bit ahead of myself a little earlier. A tiered approach, I think that would be the best option for us to go towards. Ideally, we would set this up during the budget process through the meetings. At that point, we would have a better idea of our unassigned balance. In a way, as we kind of have been commenting to the board, addressing some of the concerns with the current budget, dealing with vacancy budgeting and tightening up all these numbers. So by the time that we begin the budget process, we have a clear number as to what our unassigned fund balance truly is, freeing up any tied up expenses. And then at that point, we would set up percentages for the two tiers. A tiered expense, have a percentage for the operating and then a percentage for safety. And another piece is I would like to have a build-up approach. Like I mentioned earlier, based off our 2021 fiscal year, if we took the unassigned balance minus the ARPA funding, we would in a way limit our flexibility within the budget to do different projects that may or may not come up. And if we do a build-up approach, whether over the course of a couple of years, we build out to that exact percentage that we would like to set up, that would be, in my mind, and within the budget, the most appropriate way to approach this. Another item, which would be a good suggestion, is to provide some fluidity from fiscal year to fiscal year. Not every year is going to be the same. We're going to have different circumstances from one year to the next, whether if it's a year that we're dealing with negotiations or a year that we're dealing with some more projects that we want to implement or not. So, or it could be a year where we're anticipating some more revenue coming in, so maybe you want to put a little bit more on that side. Or it could be a year where we're in the year where we think that it's going to be a really safe year. We're going to be receiving a lot of revenue, so maybe we want to spend a little bit more. So something like that will provide a little bit of flexibility. So from year to year within the budget process, we would set these percentages as a policy within the year and within the budget process, so we have an idea on what we're kind of moving towards and have some goals set in mind. As I mentioned, I think right now I wanted to kind of bring this up as a informational piece, and I think the appropriate time would be the budget process to definitely bring this back, set it up, so we have essentially a running start right now, and as we kind of pick up speed with the budget process in the coming months in the new year, we'll get going and put something together so we have an appropriate policy. And as you know, today's been kind of heavily on the financial side. We were talking a little bit earlier today about a bond and debt servicing. Having a budget policy and a structured budget policy is seen as very financially stable within within any jurisdiction. And if we're able to set something up where we're able to directly identify what our targets are and what our tier system, I think would benefit the county immensely. And if later on if we decide to move forward with the COP or with any other debt servicing, whether it's for roads or for infrastructure, I think this would be a nice piece to bring along with that. With that, I will turn it back to the board for any questions or comments that the board may have.
Okay. Are there any questions for clarification from the board members? Okay. So if not, then let's go to the public. Was that a question?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, sorry.
If you'd like to make a comment in chambers, please provide a speaker card. On Zoom, press star 9 on your phone or the raise your hand icon on your screen. No comments.
Okay. So we'll bring it back then to the board. Comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
I'll keep it brief. I just appreciate a good presentation. I feel like we need to move from what I would sort of think of as chaos budgeting to a more prudent, responsible approach, a structured approach. I think that sounds like the tone that I was hearing. Whether we have extra money to spend down or not, I feel like we should have a policy in place so we know from year to year we have targets, and it just seems like it's a prudent, responsible, practical way of looking at our budget. Thank you. And lastly, I would say if we're going to do the splits, I thought the 15 and 5, we can talk about it, but that seems to make sense to me. Whether we do a 15 total or 20 total, my understanding is that 15% is generally considered a healthy reserve in government circles. So 20% would be very healthy. And
Oh, yeah.
so either way, I would be fine with. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think it makes sense to have a policy. It sounds to me like 2 months, or I kind of like the idea of a percentage. But either one, looking at 2 months, which is a little over 9 million, 15% is around 10. So it seems like 15% might be a good target. With right now, as you mentioned, if you take away the ARPA money, we've got around 6 or so. So, we need to work our way up to that level, is what you're saying. And I think that makes sense. It's maybe we can put aside every year $1 million or $2 million or whatever till we get whatever level we decide. And then, the tiered approach, I think, makes sense. Whether it's 10 and 5 or, 12 and a half and 2 and a half or whatever. But anyway, I do think it makes sense to have a policy. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree. It is just fiscal prudence to make sure you have, a reserve fund, a savings account, so to speak. Most people should have that in their own household, so we should certainly have it on this level as well. So, and I agree with the tiered approach that Supervisor Tiffany was just saying, maybe building up to that. I think that was a great recommendation that you had, and we should certainly have a policy about this.
Supervisor Hernandez?
Yes, Madam Chair. My only concern with, a reserve policy sounds good in theory. I don't know what, right now we have, actually, let me ask, what is the actual up-to-date numbers as far as our reserve that we have?
So, it was part of the prior presentation, but essentially the amount that I guess you can consider unassigned reserves would be about 13 million. But out of those 13 million, 6 million is ARPA. The other sources of funding that we do have within the fund that the county does have is either committed or assigned to specific expenditures, or is funding that is just locked away that we can't access for one reason or another, whether it's related to our pension obligation or related to specific expenses tied to general fund. So for example, our safety, some safety reserves that are set in place. So for the amount of funding that we can access, it's that 13 million, but 6 million of is ARPA, so leaving us with about 6-7 million that we do have access to that we'd be able to put away.
Madam Chair, if I may as well, just to highlight that, to add further, we do have some other, we've been mentioning that there might be some more money coming to the county, so it looks like, and we've had a reserve set aside, a restricted reserve. It's looking like we're going to be able to push that over into our regular unassigned fund balance or reserve. So when that happens, normally that happens through a budget process. It cannot happen we can't just go in there and do that, move it over. So it can be mid-year adjustment, or it can be during the budget process itself. So next year, I think what Gabriel is saying is we'll have a lot better handle on what those actual numbers are going to be. And once we have that, we'll have a really good number for you, I think.
Well, I also wanted too that, the board has directed you to look at the vacancy budgeting to see what that was going to look like.
Yeah.
And so I like the idea of putting in a reserve, but I would rather lean more toward the 20% as opposed to 15. But I would like to make sure that we take care of the budget, the vacancy budgeting first and so forth. And then we also have to remember, we had the flood, this past year, and it put us in the hole, and had we not had the funds there, we would have been in a dire situation. We're also the earthquake capital of the world, sitting right here on, the San Andreas Fault, and you never know when another big one is going to hit. And so I would like to have a healthy reserve, more toward the 20% than the 15. But we can't do that until you bring us, we start preparing for the budget between the March-May timeframe, right?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. So if we did enact a reserve policy, I would like it to coincide with the budget preparation and so forth.
And we'll make sure that happens.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So then, did you need any direction?
Madam
from us?
Chair.
Yes, Peter.
Yeah, I just asked for the question because I had a point basically, and it, you actually took the words out of my mouth. It's like the reserve policy, it doesn't really set like an expectation. It's like, well, it sets an expectation as far as a percentage and how much to put away, but it's like, why? It's not just the putting away part. It's like you mentioned, we want to make sure that we include in the conversation, not just, making sure that it's healthy with an emergency, but also, we have once a year strategic plan meetings, and the goal is to see what the goals is for the Board of Supervisors as it pertains to, and it's supposed to be on the heels of budgeting. The bottom line is if we don't have goals, we don't know what we're going after, then how do you do a budgetary plan consistent with that? So to me, it's not just putting money away. It's like, what is the plan? Because otherwise we're going to be tempted to keep touching that piggy bank. And I know that, at that point, I feel like it's not gonna stay stable, right? Because we're gonna request to be able to touch that money, and in reality, it's just gonna be back to the drawing board.
So we'll make sure we bring the policy and also what it's for.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't need any further direction?
No, we got the direction.
Good, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So that'll take us on to the next item, which is item number 10.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. This item's out of administration, but we have County Counsel Barbara Thompson. She's going to be presenting this particular item. Barbara?
I'm going to try to get this up. Let's see whether it works. Okay, thank you. The board previously asked to have an overview of the religious and medical exemptions to the mandatory vaccination requirements of the state. This is intended to be an informal presentation at a high level. This presentation will not give information regarding specific employees, and it does not intend to establish county policy or attempt to summarize the county's entire policies and procedures related to the interactive process, since that would be premature and it would risk, summarizing those matters in an overly simplistic manner. We're in the midst of the interactive process through the HR department with those employees that have submitted religious exemptions. I believe that there may be some meetings that are happening later this week. 65 county employees are subject to the state's mandatory vaccination requirement, and 6 county employees have filed for a religious or medical exemption, of which 5 were religious exemptions and 1 was a medical exemption request. And only 2 employees were subject to the mandatory vaccination. 2 employees that were subject to mandatory vaccination have filed for an exemption, of which I believe only 1 of them is a regular permanent employee. So as far as the medical exemption, it follows the normal ADA process. You must have a qualifying medical reason. The doctor, the nurse, or other licensed medical professional practicing under the license of a physician must write the note. This is common. We already have an established process for ADA. We have gone through the interactive process for a number of both physical and mental health disabilities over the years, and so it's an established process that we engage in on the ADA process. But specifically as far as COVID, these are just hypotheticals that somebody could try to, well, actually they're more than hypotheticals. These are things that could be a possible basis for being medically exempt to the COVID vaccine. The first one's being severely allergic after a previous dose or to a component of the COVID-19 vaccine, an immediate allergic reaction of any severity to a previous dose or known diagnosed allergy to a component of the vaccine. Seems pretty similar to the first one. But, and then the interim clinical considerations for the use of COVID-19 vaccines provides additional information, which I guess are not either contraindications or precautions, but I think that the doctor's supposed to take these things into account when they decide whether or not to grant or whether or not to recommend a vaccine. So I guess in some ways, allergic reactions not related to COVID vaccines could be the basis for a doctor indicating in a particular case that the person should or should not receive the vaccine. I guess it would depend on what the allergic reaction is to and how severe it is and what the doctor's position is on that and the degree of risk, and perhaps it could even have something to do with the degree of risk for the person and whether they need the vaccine to prevent from complications relating to COVID. So that's things that the doctor considers to determine whether or not the person should or should not receive the vaccine. As stated above, the doctor can write the exemption for various medical conditions. Following the normal ADA process, usually the doctor writes the note. If the county has a question regarding the doctor's note, the county will attempt to clarify it with that doctor to start with and send a note asking for the doctor's clarification. If the doctor cannot clarify it or does not clarify it, in a rare instance, the county can ask another doctor to weigh in, and that's a very specific on a case-by-case basis. If an exemption is granted, for example, on medical disability grounds, the county must offer an accommodation unless it presents an undue hardship. In this case, in the medical disability world, it's defined as a significant difficulty or expense. So in the case of a medical exemption, the county could offer testing, alternate assignments, telework, long-term leave, other accommodations subject to the the caveat that the accommodations do not present a significant difficulty or expense to the county. I believe that we only have one disability exemption request at the present time. Yeah, religious, yeah, it's next. But we had one for medical, right? Or did they withdraw it?
It's not for the vaccine.
Not for the vaccine, just for testing? The religious exemptions, the practice, this is, must be sincerely held by an individual, even if newly adopted and not consistently observed or different from commonly followed tenets of the individual's religion. And societal, political, or economic philosophies or personal preferences are not religious beliefs under Title VII. So in some ways that these things are difficult. There's case law that specifies it a little bit more in depth. A religious practice has to hold the same position as a religion would in a person's belief system. So there is a case that says veganism, although it was a personal belief, is not a religion. Similarly, a religious belief, for example, that the government shouldn't mandate vaccines would not be a religion. That would be a personal political belief. But religious beliefs such as that, I don't want to try to summarize it, but one religious belief, for example, is that somebody shouldn't take medicine and they should allow God to have control of their life and all medical outcomes pertaining to themselves. That could be a religious belief that would be separate from a political belief. If a religious exemption is, oops, typo right there, but if religious request is received, the county will engage in the interactive process. Normally, the county, in a general rule, in many religious exemption requests, the county accepts to a degree at face value the religious documentation. However, we can ask for clarification, and especially if the county has objective values or factors that might call into question the sincerity. County council and HR is going to be consulted. Individuals that have information about the person's religious belief may be consulted as well, such as a pastor or somebody that's familiar with that religious belief and how that individual has held that belief. If an exemption's granted, the county will offer accommodations unless it presents an undue hardship. Now, the undue hardship here is the same term, but it's defined differently. You must grant a reasonably accommodate unless it would impose an undue hardship. But in this case, it's defined as more than a minimal burden on the operation of the business. And so this is a higher standard, a different standard from the significant difficulty or expense. Let's see, I think that's it. We're going to be going on this interactive process. I think it's fair to say that, at least in the short term, that all the employees that have filed religious exemption requests are currently testing, I believe. And in the short term, the county will, I don't know that a final determination has been made on this matter yet, but the county will probably be offering testing, at least on a short-term basis, as a reasonable accommodation. But we're going to have to go through this accommodation process and then not prejudge, not commit to a certain course of action yet, but to enter into these these discussions in good faith with the employees regarding the religious exemptions. I can't recall in the many years that I've been here that we've had a previous religious accommodations request, so this is a new process, but we're engaging in it, and we'll have we'll be able to complete this process in the near future, and then we'll determine after that process is completed what the short-term accommodations will be, and then potentially whether the long-term accommodations would be different, because something that may be acceptable on a short-term basis may not be acceptable on a longer-term basis.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just a quick update, council and admin and HR have been working really closely together on this, and I thank county council for taking the lead on this. The only individual, as you recall, the state of California, CDPH, passed the August 5th health order that mandated behavioral health employees to be vaccinated. We engaged those employees, and all have been vaccinated with the exception of one individual who is seeking religious exemption. We're working with that individual to see what, if any, can that be accommodated. If we're following that health order, if that person is granted the accommodation on religious grounds, they would be subject to testing once weekly based on the August 5th health order from CDPH. But because your board passed the twice weekly testing, that person is twice weekly testing, and I'm happy to report that this person is complying with our testing procedures. So, and because also simultaneously, there is another health order on face covers that individuals are to wear face covers at all times, or surgical masks, excuse me, at all times at behavioral health, so regardless of vaccination status. So what we're really talking about here is one religious exemption on a vaccine mandate, and the other individuals are asking for exemptions on testing themselves. We have one medical, which without going into details, it's not going to meet the criteria, and the other ones we are going through the interactive process with county council and our administrative office with those individuals. And it's safe to say that it's not a problem in our county. We're not facing the other issues that our other counties around us are facing. Pretty much everybody's in compliance, and they're testing accordingly, and they're really thanks to those individuals for participating and being part of the process.
Well, I thank you for all the effort that you put into it, but I know that this was a question from Supervisor Hernandez. So let's go to him to see if this addresses his concerns, and then we'll bring it back to the board and/or the public. Supervisor Hernandez?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to keep it brief. And I know that the board is set on supporting this whole process. I just for clarification, part of the thought with bringing this forward was basically attorneys that had actually come to me literally scrutinizing this application process, because that's what it is. It's an application process, and the way it was told to me bluntly is we really don't have the legal authority to come up with an application process, because ultimately, especially when it pertains to religion, it really should be more of a submittal process, and especially while, like even Barbara had mentioned, that this is pending. So to require something, I think just put this in legal hot water, and I know people are going to disagree, but it doesn't. Again, these are attorneys that are mentioning this information to me, that it should be a submittal process, not an application process. And right now we're basically venturing into territory, which I could sense Barbara hesitating, is we're trying to now define what's sincerely held belief, which, and under the First Amendment, we don't have the authority to define religion, right? That's why Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, and this is not even into a law, because a mandate is not a law. But then the other element of it is now we're kind of creating a test process for validating someone's sincerely held belief. So we're venturing into unknown territory. I'm just gonna, I'll leave it at that. But at the end of the day, we basically are following a process that is going to be heavily scrutinized, and eventually, whether it's one person or 50 people, it doesn't matter. One person could open up a big lawsuit against the county for what we're creating. And I know that right now everybody's waiting and seeing with other counties. It almost seems like they're waiting to see who kind of gets into legal hot water first. So I'm just making that mention because this is the information that was given to me, that we're really venturing into territory that's going to violate the First Amendment process and even due process when it comes down to people being able to not be discriminated against. Thank you.
Supervisors have questions? Because if not, I was going to go straight to public comment. If you want to have a comment, can we
I
wait?
have a question.
Question. Go ahead
Okay.
for a question.
Question. So I understand if it's for those few, the behavioral health that are they have to be vaccinated. That's the only choice, and I understand the request for religious exemption there. But on the ones that have the choice of getting tested weekly instead of a vaccine, you made the comment they're asking religious exemption for testing, which, I mean, is there a difference in the law there? Because I guess I don't get that. I understand a religious exemption for the vaccine, but for testing is a whole nother thing. And so I guess,
That's
Can
a
you
great
explain
question,
that?
Supervisor. So you apply the same principles, county council and the administrative office would apply the same principles of Title VII. And there's guidance in the EOC on what defines, a religious exemption. It's nothing new. It's been highlighted now with COVID, but religious exemptions have always existed, even back to the beginning of times when Title VII was passed. Similarly, schools under Title IX, counties, because they're not schools, are under Title VII. EOC has put out guidance on what constitutes a religious exemption. And for testing, I can, without going into details and disclosing the details of those submittals, it seems like they Google those answers and are using answers for vaccines and not testing. So I'll just leave it at that.
quick follow-up. Our testing at this point is still the swab as opposed to, let's say, saliva test.
Some individuals had concerns about the testing that we have. I met with some of those individuals, and I showed them and explained. I did the test on me personally to sort of show them that it's not what they believed it was. It's like the old COVID test that it goes up to your brain. That's what I call it. It's really non-invasive. It goes about, a quarter of an inch on your nose, and you're done within 10 seconds.
Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the public then for public comment.
In chambers, if you'd like to make a comment, please provide a speaker card. On Zoom, please press *9 on your phone or the raise your hand icon on your screen. No comments.
Okay, so this was just to receive the presentation, and if there aren't any further comments or concerns, then we'll go ahead and move on to the next item, which is item number 11.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have Tracy Belton on the line. Tracy?
Hi, yes, good afternoon, almost evening, and welcome Supervisor Dirks to the new board. So this is a presentation that is going to be provided, I believe, by Supervisor Kosmicki and Supervisor Tiffany regarding the vaccine incentive, as well as some updates on some vaccine numbers that we also talked about at the ad hoc. And I think you have the PowerPoint to share.
We'll get the PowerPoint up here in a minute.
Sure.
There we go. Supervisor Kosmicki, you want to start off, or?
Sure, I
Tiffany?
can. Thank you, yes, and thank you, Madam Chair. So I think we can keep this relatively brief. As we all know, the board approved a vaccine incentive effective August 10th, $200. We came to that amount, feeling like that would potentially push people over the edge. The goal was to inch up that vaccination rate, get as many extra percentage points as we could, and we feel like, looking at the numbers that, we have accomplished that to this point. As you can see, fully vaccinated, 73.1, statewide 73.5, and then one dose 81.2 to 81.4. We're basically in line with the state at this point, whereas when we started this process, if you remember, we were pretty significantly below the state, which I sort of see as a key barometer, because over time you're naturally going to have the diminishing returns that we're seeing, and we're seeing everywhere. Basically, you're going to get to 50% a lot quicker than you're going to get from 50 to 80, because you have a smaller pool of people that are potentially considering vaccines, and then the resistant folks are just maybe never going to get it. So you're, but we have inched up successfully, and as you can see, We still have 18.8% not yet vaccinated, but again, that's pretty much in line with the state. As everybody here, I think, knows, the state of California has done very, very well in relation to the rest of the country. So I'm proud of our community, that we've stepped up as a community, and we've stepped up on the board as leaders and pushed this forward, and our staff that's really ran this program, really very pleased. Everyone from public health all the way to our treasurer's office that's been involved. And so now we're at the point where we are in this critical phase of 5 to 11-year-old, even though our vaccination numbers have gone down. Oh, sorry, we went to another slide here. You can go to the next slide, that's fine. Oops. Yeah, so we see the age groups, obviously, and we're hitting that 5 to 11 age group now. And, that's the next big critical phase, as I said, to really put an end to this pandemic, at least do our local part to put an end to the pandemic. And the thought with the incentive now, because we're going to be running out literally in the next several days, probably by the end of the week, we'll be out of the $500,000 allocation from American Rescue Plan Act dollars, is that whether we want to extend that dollar amount, especially considering the 5 to 11 age group. The thought is, do we really want to pull the rug out now when we have all these local families that have these children that are eligible, that may be incentivized to get that vaccine? And even if people were going to get it either way, the thing to remember is that it's still, we're still in tough times here, and either way, that's money in the hands of local families. So to me, it's a good investment either way, but I do feel strongly, and I know Supervisor Tiffany as well from the ad hoc feels that, we are making headway and will make headway going forward. You can go to the next. I think those are all self-explanatory. And so I talked about 5 to 11. You can see the numbers there, obviously, the numbers booked. I think there's a general consensus that this is the part where there might also be some hesitancy, because parents, they're dealing with their children's health, and children are maybe less prone to get sick. And so that's sort of a challenge in its own right. But I also will, at least from my point of view, say that, we are still all in this together, so to speak, and the more people that are vaccinated, including children, and especially with the holidays coming, and that's something that I emphasized in the ad hoc committee, is let's not forget Thanksgiving and Christmas is around the corner. Getting as many people vaccinated is really going to be key, so that we don't go into another phase of, our cases going up, our hospitalizations and deaths going up. And so getting your child vaccinated, that could ultimately save the life of grandma and grandpa and aunt and uncle that are going to be congregating during the holidays. You can keep going. And then these are just the numbers that we're seeing. We had a lot of demand, in the last few weeks. It's tapered off a little bit, but again, part of that is just that natural diminishing returns that we're seeing. So we're going to run out probably this week. We also have the gift card program, so it's $200 of cash incentive from our ARPA funds, along with $25 gift cards that our public health office has gone out and gotten through other sources. And so it's essentially a $225. It's $25 for the first dose, $200 for fully vaccinated. You can keep going. And that's it. So the recommendation that Supervisor Tiffany and I discussed in ad hoc was to do an extension of $250,000 to, we don't know exactly how many more people are going to get vaccinated, but by putting out another allocation, we feel that that will be another added incentive for people to get vaccinated. And then if we do see that rush, we could always consider, if need be, extending it later, but $250,000 seemed like the right amount of money. And I don't know if Supervisor Tiffany had anything else he wanted to add.
Yeah, I think Supervisor Kuzmicki pretty much covered it. It's great to see us basically at state levels. We really have made up a lot of ground. We also, in the beginning, we were particularly concerned with the Latino community and some of the populations that were more at risk, and we've come now they're at the same levels or ahead of the white population. So I think that's been a real positive. So again, just reiterate, I think we've done a great job as a county. And just to reiterate what Supervisor Kuzmicki said, we're just starting with the under 12-year-olds, the 5 to 11-year-olds. So we feel We just yesterday, for the first time, had some, the initial vaccines in some of those children. We don't want to lose momentum with that group of individuals. We also need to do a better job in the 12 to 18-year-old age category. So anyway, we feel strongly that we're going to run out this week, just when we're getting going with that 5 to 11-year-old group. It's an important group, and we want to make sure there's some incentives for that group as well. So we're hoping that we'll get the support from the entire board to allocate. We're suggesting $250,000. Obviously, we can talk about that. That would again come from the American Rescue Plan monies, just as the $500,000 did. It's money well spent, I think, and that's what that money is definitely earmarked for, is for COVID-related areas. So we also, I just mentioned that in our ad hoc committee meeting, we are talking about how to do additional outreach. We're going to continue pushing hard in that area. And Supervisor Kuzmicki and I both recommended that we put out a flyer that would address the younger vaccinations, as well as the boosters, as well as just addressing some of the maybe hesitations that parents might have for the younger children. So we're gonna be looking to get that out to the community as well. That's all I have. Thank you.
I may just add just an update on the 5 to 11-year-old data. It hasn't been uploaded into the CARE system as of this morning. And so the slide that we presented doesn't have accurate data of how many children aged 5 to 11 have been vaccinated. The numbers that we did report out was the number that our public health staff vaccinated. And so all the other providers on that list have been vaccinating children from 5 to 11. And so hopefully within the next week, we'll have a better number to report out through the ad hoc. So I just wanted to provide that so that wasn't misleading.
Any comments questions from the board? No, if you don't have one, you don't have to ask. Supervisor Hernandez, have any questions?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to public comment then on this item.
If you'd like to make a comment in chambers, please provide a speaker card. On Zoom, press *9 on your phone or the raise your hand icon on your screen. You've been unmuted. Please state your name, and you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name's Celeste. I was in the chambers earlier, but because I am unvaccinated, I was segregated and asked to leave because I wasn't wearing my face shield. So that being said, at this point, those who are vaccinated have presumably protected themselves against severe COVID or death, as numerous studies indicated and public health authorities acknowledge children are at little risk of developing severe COVID-19, accordingly requiring any COVID-19 vaccine, especially among students, populations in sophomore, middle, and high school. For a product that does not even prevent transmission to others is not the answer, and it appears to be an unethical and unscientific way to use children as a shield to protect segments of the adult population who do not actually understand the limitations of these vaccine products, who have their own option to be vaccinated in any case. Also, I just want to make sure that you guys understand that this is under the emergency use authorization still, and you guys I don't believe that you guys are under no authority able to give any guidance to parents that do not want to vaccinate their children with the COVID-19 vaccine. They should check in with their own personal doctors. I'm not anti-vax. My kids are fully vaccinated with other vaccines. We're just not ready to get the COVID vaccine. So with that being said, I think you guys are doing something very unethical, and you shouldn't be segregating the public like myself and not being able to enter the chambers because I'm unvaccinated. Thank you.
No other comments.
Okay, let's bring it back to the board. I know that it's been suggested by the ad hoc that we go ahead and add additional monies for the incentive. I'm not in favor of doing that, and I'll explain why. We do have the ARPA funding, but we've only had one meeting so far to talk about the ad hoc and how some of the funds should go. So I'm not ready to allocate something right now. We set aside $500,000, and I see that as rewarding someone for behavior that we had to coax them into getting it. I love the fact that our numbers are almost synonymous with the state in terms of we're at 73.1% fully vaccinated, where the state's at 73.5%. It proved that it worked, but I have to go back and look at all the people that followed the rules in January and February when the vaccines first became available and took their vaccines. The $200 isn't available to them. It was only available to convince and urge the individuals who are on the fence to then get the vaccine after August the 10th. So we proved that it worked. Our numbers are great, but I don't have any intentions to vote to renew any additional funds. $500,000 was $500,000. If we're down at the remaining few, I suggest those of you that are on the fence, get off the fence and get your vaccine right away because the funds are dwindling and there may not be any left if you don't get, well, the getting is good. But that's just my 2 cents. I know that we're in the realm right now where we're looking at 5-year-olds and 11-year-olds right now that hadn't been available to get the vaccine previously. But if the parents want to protect their children, they will. If they don't, as the speaker said, she's not going to. So I don't see a need to replenish the incentive pool. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was a little bit on the fence, and then I started thinking it through. And because it is 5 to 11-year-olds, it could potentially be a hardship for a parent to take off work and get their child to get vaccinated. So if this is a way to help them make that decision where at least some of their pay would be given back to them by receiving $200, then I feel like maybe that's worth it. I think for me, it becomes an equity issue. I'm able to do that, and it wouldn't affect my daily pay, but not everyone is in that same position, so I want to give credence to that.
Supervisor Hernandez?
Yeah, but the board already knows how I feel. I don't believe in coercing the public at all to be taking vaccines. It should be their own convictions and conscience. I don't agree. The EUA actually mandates that we don't coerce. So I definitely don't agree with coercing 5 to 11-year-olds or even their parents to get their children vaccinated, especially when they're extremely low risk. And I've already heard a lot of reports from doctors that are opposing 5 to 11-year-old vaccinations. The risk outweigh the benefit. So I don't agree with supporting any more funds, Madam Chair. Thank you.
On the table, and someone wants a motion and second it to decide if you want to renew the allocation. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we allocate $250,000 from the ARPA funds for extending the $200 vaccination incentive.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay, so I have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 So I have a 3. Those opposed? Nay.
No.
Okay, so I have a 3-2. Okay.
Supervisor Gonzalez and Supervisor Hernandez voted
Yes.
for the record.
Supervisor Gonzalez and Supervisor Hernandez were the noes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and take us on to item number 12. And that would be the ad hoc update or committee assignments for the supervisors. we kind of already did it, but was there anything else you want to add, anyone? I'm going to decline, I don't need anything to add.
I'm okay today in light of time. There's nothing critical.
I'm good.
Okay. Betsy, you don't have a
Betsy?
committee or had a, yet? Pretty soon. Supervisor Hernandez, do you have anything else to add to anything that you said previously?
No, Madam Chair, thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I just want to say one thing. I just wanted to thank staff, in particular Edgar Nolasco and Dulce Alonso for working on that letter so quickly and
Yes.
getting that out. So they were able to get it out. They put it in the portal, and then they were able to copy the commissioners as well as our congressman. Just an FYI.
You got
And yeah.
the thing I sent you.
Well, yeah, and that includes, so just for the record, let me get my glasses. It's old age here.
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Alicia Fernandez, Commissioner Pedro Toledo, Commissioner Patricia Sine, Commissioner Angela Vasquez, along with our congressman. So, thank you.
Good, thank you. Okay, so that takes us to the consent agenda. So items 13 through 28. So I know there's been some concern from the public asking us to see which ones we would pull first or going to the public. So clarification.
Fine.
That's fine to which? Go to the public first? Or,
No, I think it's fine to poll so that if they want to talk. I mean, but they're the chair, it's fine. I mean,
I'm just trying to be consistent, and I think I wasn't. So what is the route we're going to? Going to the public first, hearing the public comment on?
Yeah, since
Okay,
the.
so
since-
let's
yeah.
stay
And
on
if
point.
they do more than one item, they get 5 minutes to speak.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Right,
let's,
and I think the argument is that the public may ask that something get pulled, and then if we think that they have a
If it
good
needs it, right.
reason, then we will pull it.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
that's the
That's
thinking.
correct.
okay, so let's hear from the public then.
In chambers, Elia Salinas.
Tell us,
Mike, please.
Okay, I would like to pull item 13, and that's the only thing that I have a comment on.
okay,
Do I speak now?
yes.
Okay, so we gave kudos to Nielsen Merksimer for getting us that $700,000 for the regional park. We gave kudos to Robert Rivas for getting us the $700,000 for the regional park. However, I'm pulling this item because I want more money. Watsonville Ramsey Regional Sports Complex received $7 million. Salinas Rebuild Huban Community Center received $8.1 million. And San Benito County got scraps as far as I'm concerned. We were so excited we got $700,000. Then I read this. And we need to put it out to Nielsen Merksimer that they need to do further work. They need to be more aggressive. We need more money. I'm seriously, $700,000, even if each one of these different entities, municipalities would have given us $1 or $2 million from that, we would be able to do so much with a regional park. So the reason I asked for this to be pulled is I want to put Nielsen Merksimer on notice that we're watching them, and you're about to give them 3-year contract. We need more money in San Benito County. We're a very poor county, and Watsonville is a big city compared to, is the size of the city. The size of Watsonville is the size of our county, and yet they received $8.1 million. So I know I keep repeating myself, but let that set in. Nielsen Merksimer, we need more money. Thank you.
I know we're not supposed to respond to the public, but I just have to, I have to. On this contract, I asked the same question when we got the grant, and I said, well, I guess we asked for too little. So it was the grant that we were applying for. It's not that the dollar figure that we received, we just didn't ask for enough. And so it was the grant. So it wasn't her doing it, so we asked the lobbyist to go after. But since I'm already talking, I might as well. Do we have any from the public?
If you'd like to make a comment on Zoom, please press *9 on your phone or the raise your hand icon on your screen. No comments.
Good, sorry, because I jumped the gun. Yes.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, normally we don't comment on those things, but I do, I think, you've been waiting here all day long, and she asked this one item, I think it's important. I will say, we brought her on board after the fact, really. The budget process was done at the state. And so it was kind of an afterthought, and we worked hard to meet with her. She worked hard up there at the state, knocking on doors and really lobbying hard for our county. So it was kind of after the fact. But one of the things that we did do, and those other counties and city of Watsonville and all these other jurisdictions, they meet this year for next year. So we've already met. We met with all the board, excluding you. Will have to sit down with you after. But we met with department heads to look at projects and to really go after a lot more money. So the goal is to get a lot more money this year, and she's well aware of it. So we'll keep you posted, and we'll come back to your board with a presentation on what we're looking for as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on that note, for item number 13 through 28, what would you like to pull, board members?
13 to make a brief comment.
Okay, good. And then I'll continue my comment too. Supervisor Tiffany?
Yeah, I'd just like, 27, just I have a question and a couple comments, so.
Okay, 27. Supervisor Dirks, any one that you would like to pull? Okay. Okay, you double check while I'm gonna go to Supervisor Hernandez. Supervisor Hernandez, did you have any items you wanted to pull?
No, Madam Chair. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. You're good? Okay. So, I wanted to pull item number 21 and 22, but just for questions in terms of the grants that we're looking at. I want to accept them, I just wanted to clarification. All right, so we have item number 13 being pulled, item 21, 22, but just for clarification, and item 27. So what is the will of the board of the remaining items 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 28?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve those items.
Okay. Have a second?
I second.
Okay, so we have a first and a second. All in favor? Say aye.
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 Okay, so we have a 5-0 on those items. So let's start with item 13, go on to 21, 22, and then 27.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So my only thought is, I noticed I understand there's going to be travel, but I caught my eye that there was $28,500 in travel. Their total cost I read was $73,500. Am I missing something when I did the math? What I saw in the staff report, total cost, FYI cost, $73,500, and then the contract was $45,000. So that just subtracting, I came away with $28,500, and I guess I may be wrongly assuming that was travel? Because it mentioned that the lobbyist came and was able to, asked after the fact for reimbursement of travel according to the county's travel policy. And again, I understand there's going to be travel. I just want to make sure that we're keeping an eye that that's not, because that's 40% of that's not correct? Okay. Well, if we could just get clarification on that part of it, and figure out what that FY total cost was, because it was significantly more than the contract amount.
Madam Chair, why don't we go ahead and hear the other items and maybe look at the numbers real quick, just for clarity, if that's okay, and we can come back to this.
Okay.
Thanks.
I just saw it as the annual amount that was due to her, the 73.5, and maybe she came on because she came on so late in the year. I don't know. But just to respond to the public comment, She basically, well, you go ahead and research it and figure that out, but she basically brought to the county 10 times of what her annual salary would have been. So for the supervisor who's no longer sitting on the board with us, who was very much against us hiring a lobbyist, this person paid back to the county 10 times the amount of what we would be paying for an annual salary. So I don't have a problem with the 3-year contract and the figures. She did meet with each of us individually, each sitting supervisor, and I do know that there was asked for our preferences of areas we wanted to work on so that she had a goal and a game plan. So I expect to see more money coming into the county from her hard effort.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I
was just
may,
gonna-
oh, go ahead.
Well, I'll just piggyback real quick. But to the point that you made, Elia, I think, yeah, she came late to the game, but the fact that, Watsonville and others got so much money, and certainly it got our attention, is an indication that you have to be ready. You got to have shovel-ready projects.
Yes.
You got to be ready when the money's available. There was a lot of money available this last year. There's hopes that there's going to be quite a bit of money this coming year, but it tells us of the urgency of being ready. So, I still think she very much is worth it, but we need to get ready for this upcoming budget year. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, just
Yes.
quickly comment on that. So I did look at it a little bit. So item B4 in the contract itself, it actually says payments will be made once, 1 month in advance on services with an annual travel reimbursement not to exceed $1,500 annually. So the max is $1,500. It's basically for the first year, 2022, it'll be $6,000 times 12, plus $1,500 is $73,500. That's what that number
Okay.
is. So
Got it.
each year is only $1,500 for travel. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, when you said that, I was like, wait a minute, I know it was only
Sorry for assuming
$1,500.
that. I shouldn't have assumed, and I caught it late, so I would have asked.
No,
prior to
no worries, yeah.
As long as just real quick, the comment about watching over, they know we're watching, and there's a termination clause in the contract, 30 days written notice. So
Yeah.
they have plenty of accountability to keep them on track.
And she's eager, she's gonna work hard. She's already working hard for us right now.
Okay. So then, you're good, right? We got our answer. Okay. So then what is the will of the board on item number 13? Okay.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Okay, so how about if I let you have second? Supervisor Kozmicki didn't have his mic on. Okay.
Sure.
Supervisor Kozmicki with the first, Supervisor Hernandez with the second. All in favor, say aye.
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 We have a 5-0 on that vote. Okay. So my item was 21 and 22, and I just kind of wanted to ask for a little bit of explanation on both the grants and 22 particularly. So Tracy, are you on the line? Oh, Lynn, okay. Lynn?
Sure. Good afternoon. So we have 2 grants. One is the CDC Crisis Response Public Health Workforce Supplemental Funding, which is a grant that will assist us in building our workforce in order to respond to COVID-19 in the community. And then we have our other grant, which is the Equitable Recovery Initiative, which is to address disparities in the community. And what they really want from us is to hire an equity officer, basically, and to begin a community assessment to work to begin to determine where those disparities are, and then begin to address those in this grant. And these are monies that are coming from the CDC in both cases.
Bit of research, and I just wanted to see what else were we going to do differently, because I know they suggest 4 strategies, and it looked like we were already doing some of them. So how are we going to add to this to make it better, whatever it is that we're doing at the county level, to work on the strategies to address the inequities in the community. And so I hear you said that's good to know that we're going to hire an equity officer. So what exactly would that officer be doing?
Well, they would have to do a countywide community assessment, and determine where, the inequities lie, which we've already begun to see through GIS mapping and through some epidemiology work. But we really have to dig deeper, and that would be a plan that we'd have to formulate with the health officer and with the epidemiologists to really, determine how we're going to carry out the community assessment.
And I read the various playbooks from Oakland, LA, and Sonoma County. Does San Benito County have some sort of plan of action ready to go that's similar, that's reported in the playbook?
Well, we don't. What we have had our eye on for many years is what's known as public health accreditation. And that is a process that, involves the Public Health Accreditation Board. It's similar to, it's comparable, but not similar to the Joint Accreditation Board that JACO that goes to the hospital. It's sort of the same thing, where you have to meet all these different criteria and have a community assessment done, and then you have to have a community health improvement plan. So we've had our eye on this for many years, but we just haven't been able to get there because of the workforce turnover, and just a workforce that we just didn't have a strong enough workforce to be able to carry that out. And so we would use that model to begin to work toward accreditation, and we would tie that into some of the strategies that are used in playbooks.
That's what the funding would go toward, then, is to do whatever we haven't been doing, hadn't been able to afford. Rather, it was, lack of personnel or resources. Those are the goals that we're going to be looking at, though.
Yeah, the Office of, CDPH has an Office of Health Equity, and they're really charging health departments to focus on equity and do these community assessments. Many health departments have done that because they have more money, because they have more staff, they have more capacity. But we just haven't been able to do that, because we haven't had the capacity.
Is it possible when this grant is, we accept it and we implement it, that you can come back to the board and report what we're doing with it? Because that's something I'm curious about.
Sure. I mean, we can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can have the equity officer. We're supposed to hire the equity officer by December 30th. I'm not sure that we'll make that date. But of course, we'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Then I withdraw my objections for both item 21 and 22. So on that note, can I move to approve them both at the same time? Okay. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I didn't. Did we go to the public on this one? Do we have any questions from the public on 21, 22? We already did? Oh, then never mind. So then I'm going to go ahead and make a motion. Sorry, the hour is late. Blood sugar is dropping. I'll make a motion to accept the grant from the California Department of Public Health, the CDPH, for national initiative to address the COVID health disparities among populations at high risk, for in the amount of an award for $300,000. And then the second item, to accept the California Public Health Workforce Development Supplemental Funding allocations in the amount of $530,000 for COVID-19 public health crisis response and public health workforce development, and authorize the HHHSA director, on that, the second one too, the authority to sign all related documents on both 21 and 22. Oh, yes. Okay. And approve the budget adjustments And the amount accordingly for item 22, it would be 235,181. And for item 21, to approve the budget adjustment in the amount of 125,000. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
No.
Okay, so I have a 4-1 with Supervisor Hernandez as the no. Okay, so then the last item was item 27, and that was Supervisor Tiffany that
That was
that.
me. I'll make this quick. This is on every meeting's agenda, or every month, I guess. And I understand, I don't know if Mike's on the line, or Ray, you can answer this, but it dates back to the emergency, dealing with emergency that we had in the flooding in late January. And so two questions. One is, have we, and I gather the answer is no, but it's been a while since I've heard. We've never heard anything in regards to state of emergency funds. I guess never received them. And so that was one question. And number two, I don't have a problem with it, but it's been a long time and this is on. I'm just wondering why we're continuing to operate under this emergency.
Gabriel can go ahead and comment on those items.
I can comment a little bit. Thank you, board and supervisors. So we've had this item kind of rolling from month to month to address essentially our, weather phenomena that we had over there, the road that washed out, in anticipation of potentially receiving some funding from the state. As far as communication and what we've been able to gather, maybe a month or so ago, maybe a little bit more than a month, we had a call with Cal OES. They wanted to check in on a couple of projects that we had going on and whether there was anything on our side that we wanted to check up on. Obviously, one of the things that we asked about was essentially our request for the governor to declare emergency over there, so we'd be able to request funding to cover the work related to fixing up that road. During that time, Cal OES did recognize that we had submitted that, so they're aware of that. And they did mention that it was something that was waiting on the governor, similar to how the District 1 supervisor was waiting on on the governor.
Now they got you out of the way, maybe we'll get our money.
So, and I know during that time, when we had called, essentially the governor was still up for the recall. He was dealing with some of the fires, and then we had a request for a supervisor and this request for funding for him to declare essentially the disaster so we can get some more funding. So it's something that is kind of outside Cal OES. It's sitting on the governor for him to make a move. I think it'd do us well to having our lobbyists up there to make sure that we can talk to our assembly member and our senator to make sure that we can make sure that they keep pushing the governor to see if they can address this issue. I think that's probably going to be our best option. I know, as it was mentioned, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's going to be a year before we know it. Would it make any sense for us to send a letter to the governor? I don't know whether
We have.
I know. I
we
think
have.
Yeah. So
It's
okay.
it's more for housekeeping to be reimbursed really, and that's really kind of
Do we
it.
think there's still a reasonable chance that we will get some money? Who knows?
Yeah, we don't know. I'll be honest.
Okay.
I do know Mike is just tying this in. With the roads that got washed out there, I know that Mike Chambliss has been working on a plan B to address those roads. He's been out there, I think, a couple of times. I know for sure once. I believe he's on the line. Mike, did you want to add anything further on some of the work you're doing on that as well?
Yeah, Steve and I have been out there a couple times. Jason's going to do a few modifications to make the temporary repair a lot more permanent so that a storm coming through won't wash it out. I do have Steve pulling together the data of where we did spend the $1 million for a final report in case the governor does make a decision so that we can wrap this up and get it off the paperwork. That's the other component. We gotta do a final report on where the money was spent. So I'm hoping to have that ready for the meeting in December.
Thank you. That was it. I have no problem with this. I just curious where we stood.
Okay, so then,
Just back to your board. Go ahead and
so
move
what is
that
the will
item
of the
forward.
board for item 27 then?
I'll make a motion that we approve this item.
I'll second.
Okay, we have first and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0 on that item. That takes us to future agenda items. So anyone want to put anything on the next agenda or future agenda? I know we have the item, the 23rd coming back, the tax sharing agreement, definitely. Anything else?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We've had some discussions about, at the Veterans Park Commission, and it came up in intergovernmental about the future of Veterans Park. And, but I do know that potentially was something we would want to send back to Parks and Recreation. And but I think it probably should start at the board just to see if there's any interest in talking about the future of Veterans Park and how we want to deal with a lot of the issues there. So that's basically the one thing that I had on my list.
Was there a particular?
Yeah, well,
I didn't understand.
Yeah, so I'll just be blunt about it. I don't quite understand the arrangement at Veterans Park. It's a little bit confusing to me. The county owns the park. The city and the county have a mutual sort of arrangement. I'm just as what I call one of those wacky thoughts, but maybe there's something there. Would it be better for the city because it's a park that's in the middle of the city, it largely serves city residents. The city has a Parks and Recreation Commission or Parks and Recreation Department that I think does a really good job. We don't have the resources necessarily to manage it, and I think that there have been a lot of issues at that park over the years because of the fact that we don't really have resources. And the thought is to look at the possibility of whether we want to have some sort of formal arrangement for the city Parks and City and their Parks and Recreation Commission to manage it under a lease or whatever it might be. Just it's more of a long-term sort of issue.
Well, I'm glad you're on that council because I do know that there has been some particular relationships, the way that the city received the land from the veterans, and that's why we have the Vets Park Commission and so forth. I'm running it, and so definitely I will second his, just for clarification to see if something can be done. But I do know that Maria Spandry, who's the commissioner out there, the president, I think, of the board of is having some difficulty. I know with quorum was an issue, and then just cooperation. And so I know water's an issue, the bathrooms, the homeless. And so I know that there's a lot of things going on with that one there. Yes. Any other items then for the future?
These were already discussed, but during the cannabis discussion, we talked about coming back with looking at exploring the taxing, potentially taxing change, maybe lowering the rate. So that was one item. And then another cannabis, I had asked that we take a closer look at how we would plan for the additional deputies, kind of plan that out. So those were two items. And then we were going to, of course, come back with the amendment for the local background check. So those items.
I'll also be a second on that one too, because I know it was for clarification. Yes, okay. I guess there's nothing else, okay. So if there aren't any other future agenda items, let's go ahead and I'll take a motion for adjournment.
Madam Chair, as I mentioned in the beginning of the meeting, if we could, in honor of past Supervisor Curtis Graves, who recently passed away, have a moment of silence and adjourn in his honor.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if you want to make the motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn today's meeting in honor of past Supervisor Curtis Graves.
Okay, and I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, 5-0. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Congratulations, Supervisor Dirks.
Yeah.